The stagecoach jerked to a halt with a long groan from its tired wheels, stirring a thick cloud of dust that hung in the hot Texas air like a faded curtain. Margaret Sullivan pressed her gloved hand to her throat, fighting back a cough that burned in her chest. Through the dirty glass window, she caught her first sight of Willow Creek, a lonely patch of sun-baked wooden buildings crouched beneath the endless, merciless sky. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his rough voice gravelly from years on the trail. "This here's your stop." Margaret took a shaky breath and gathered her skirt, fingers trembling slightly. Her navy blue travel dress, once neat and tidy, was now covered with dust from the 3-day ride from St. Louis. The cameo brooch she wore at her neck, her mother's last gift, glimmered faintly in the afternoon sun, a small reminder of grace in this raw, rugged place. The driver climbed down and offered his calloused hand. "Easy there, miss." His grip swallowed hers for a brief moment before he turned back to unload her trunk. It hit the ground with a thump, raising another puff of dust. To Margaret, the trunk looked as lost and out of place as she felt. Inside it were the few pieces of her old life, her dresses, her books, the photograph of her late parents, and the letters that had led her to this strange, lonely town. "You sure someone's meeting you here?" the driver asked, squinting at her. "Ain't wise for a lady to be standin' alone out in the open like this." "Yes," Margaret replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Theodore Blackwood will be here soon. He's expecting me." The driver shrugged, unconvinced. With a flick of the reins, the stagecoach rattled away, vanishing down the dusty road and leaving her standing alone in the middle of Willow Creek's Main Street. For a moment, she fought the wild urge to run after it, to beg for a ride back to civilization. But there was no turning back. St. Louis held nothing for her now. The factory where she'd worked had closed. Her small room had been rented out, and her savings had all gone toward this journey. The letters from Theodore Blackwood, a rancher looking for a wife through a matrimonial newspaper, had seemed like a blessing. He'd written about needing a partner, someone to help manage his home and share his life. His tone had been polite, businesslike, promising security and companionship. She'd answered honestly, describing her education and her willingness to work hard. When he sent money for her passage, she dared to hope again for the first time since her parents' death 2 years earlier. Now, under the burning sun and the curious stares of strangers, Margaret wondered if she'd made a mistake. Faces peeked from windows. A few men lounged outside the saloon, watching her openly. Women paused mid-errand to whisper behind their fans. A lady in a pink dress leaned toward her friend, murmuring something that made both of them smirk. 2 cowboys elbowed each other and laughed. Margaret straightened her back and lifted her chin. She'd dealt with worse than gossip before. She checked her small watch. Theodore was already 20 minutes late. Maybe he'd been delayed at the ranch. Half an hour passed. Then 40 minutes. The heat pressed down like a weight, sweat collecting beneath her corset, her throat dry as sand. Still, she stayed beside her trunk, refusing to abandon it for a drink of water. At last, she spotted a man walking down the road, a tall figure with broad shoulders, wearing a black vest and a white shirt gone gray from wear. His hat hid his face, but his stride was sure and deliberate. This must be him, she thought, relief flooding through her. "Mr. Blackwood?" she called when he was close enough. The man stopped, pushed his hat back, and studied her with eyes as cold and sharp as steel. His expression was hard, his mouth twisted in a frown. "You're Margaret Sullivan?" he asked, disbelief clear in his tone. "I am," she said politely, extending her hand. He didn't take it. "You're not what I expected." The words stung. She forced a small smile. "It was a long journey, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm sure I look a fright after. It ain't your looks," he interrupted, scowl deepening. "Though you're plainer than your letters made you sound. It's what I've heard." I beg your pardon? Got a telegram from your old boss back in St. Louis, he said, crossing his arms. Mr. Hartley, from that factory you worked in. Said you were fired for back-talking the supervisor. Said you're stubborn, opinionated, and hard to manage. Margaret's cheeks flushed, not with shame, but anger. Mr. Hartley dismissed me because I asked that the women get a short break during their 12-hour shifts. If that makes me stubborn, there you go again, Theodore cut her off sharply. Argon already, not 5 minutes off the coach. I need a wife who knows her place. A woman to keep my home and raise my young uns, not one to question my every word. Mr. Blackwood, surely we can discuss. Nothing to discuss, he snapped. I paid your passage out of kindness, but that's where it ends. You're not what I need. Too educated, too opinionated, too much trouble. A man needs peace in his house, not debate. Around them, people pretended to mind their business, but their ears were clearly tuned in. Margaret could feel every gaze burning into her. Her humiliation was complete, but her voice stayed calm. Then you should have written in your advertisement that you wanted a servant, not a wife, she said quietly. His face turned red. Any decent woman knows what's expected of her. The fact that you don't proves my point. You're too stubborn for your own good. No man with sense would take you. And with that, he turned and strode away, leaving her standing in the dust, while whispers rippled through the crowd. Poor thing. Serves her right. Mail-order brides. Never ends well. Her hands shook as she reached for her trunk, but she refused to let tears fall. Not here. Not where they could see. Where's the nearest boarding house? She asked a passing woman. The woman eyed her up and down. Mrs. Patterson runs one 2 streets over, but she don't take in single women without references or a man to vouch for them. I see. Perhaps there's a hotel. A man nearby chuckled. Try the Cattleman's Rest, he called. Laughter followed. Margaret didn't understand the joke, but their looks told her enough. It wasn't a place for respectable company. She gripped the trunk handle with both hands and started down the street, ignoring the snickers. Somewhere in this town, there had to be a church, a kind soul, anyone willing to give her a chance. The sun blazed, her boots slipped in the dust and sweat dampened her collar, but she kept walking, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. Dignity costs nothing, but it's worth everything. She'd made it half a block when she heard footsteps behind her, the jingle of spurs. She didn't turn. She was too tired for more mockery. That's heavy work for a lady, a calm, steady voice said. Margaret turned then. The man who'd spoken wore worn leather chaps and a patched gray shirt. His skin was sun-browned, his frame lean but strong. His eyes, a clear green like prairie grass, studied her without judgment. I'm managing, she said tightly. I can see that, he replied, not moving closer, not offering help she hadn't asked for. But managing and needing to manage are 2 different things. Before she could answer, he bent and lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing. Where to? He asked. I'm not sure. The boarding house won't take me without a reference. He nodded, like that didn't surprise him. Name's Sam McKenna. I own a ranch 5 miles north. Margaret Sullivan, she replied, managing a small, weary smile. Though I suppose you already heard all about me. Only that Blackwood made a fool of himself in front of half the town, he said dryly. A man orders a wife like a saddle, then complains she's got a mind of her own. Despite her exhaustion, Margaret almost laughed. Perhaps I should have advertised myself as fully broken to harness. That'd be false advertising, he said, and she caught the flicker of humor in his eyes. Margaret barely had the strength to protest, as Sam hoisted her trunk onto his shoulder. You don't have to, she began, but he cut her off gently. I reckon I do, he said. No sense letting pride break your back. They started down the dusty road together, the onlookers' whispers fading behind them. The sun beat down without mercy, glinting off the windows of the small shops and saloon. Margaret's boots kicked up pale clouds of grit with every step. "You said you own a ranch?" she asked after a moment. 5 miles north, he replied. McKenna Ranch. Small but decent. Cattle mostly. You'll find it quieter than town, less judgment too. She hesitated, unsure what he meant. "And you think Mrs. Patterson will take me in if you vouch for me?" "She might," he said. "She's strict, but she respects a man's word. If I tell her you're staying proper, she'll believe me." He glanced at her sideways. "Unless you'd rather take your chances at the Catman's Rest." Margaret shuddered. "I'll take Mrs. Patterson, thank you." They reached the edge of town, where the heat shimmered like glass above the packed earth. Sam slowed his pace so she could keep up. "You're a long way from St. Louis," he said conversationally. "What made you answer a man like Blackwood?" She swallowed. His letters sounded sensible, respectable. "I thought I could build a life here." Sam grunted. "Respectable and sensible don't mean kind." He shifted the trunk to his other shoulder. "Blackwood's got money, but not much decency. Buys what he wants, then complains when it don't suit him." Margaret sighed, watching the road ahead. "Then I've truly been a fool." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just hopeful. That's no sin." They walked in silence for a while until the white-painted sign of Patterson's boarding house came into view. The building stood neat and square behind a picket fence, its porch lined with rocking chairs. A half-dozen women sat there fanning themselves, their eyes sharp as hawks. "That's her," Sam said quietly, nodding toward a small woman in a black dress and a face pinched by disapproval. "Be warned, she's got opinions about everything." Mrs. Patterson rose before they reached the steps. "Mr. McKenna," she called, her tone brisk. "What's this I hear about you bringing a stray woman into town and claiming she's your intended?" Margaret froze. The word stray stung worse than dust in her eyes. Sam touched the brim of his hat. "Afternoon, Mrs. Patterson. Miss Sullivan's come to visit before we make things official. She'll need a room." The porch erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Patterson narrowed her eyes. "I run a respectable home, Mr. McKenna. I don't house women of questionable character." Sam's voice stayed calm. "Nothing questionable about Miss Sullivan. She's been treated unfairly. That's all." "That's not what Theodore Blackwood says," Mrs. Patterson shot back. "He was here not half an hour ago. Said she's mouthy, argumentative, and unfit for marriage. Said she stirred trouble at her last job." Margaret stepped forward before Sam could answer. Her chin lifted, though her voice trembled slightly. "I spoke up for the women in my factory, Mrs. Patterson. They worked 12 hours without a break. I suggested a few minutes' rest. That was my crime." Mrs. Patterson sniffed. "Already arguing, just like you warned me. You see? The moment you open your mouth." "I open my mouth when something's wrong," Margaret said, fire creeping into her tone. The porch fell quiet. The other women stared as if she'd uttered blasphemy. One younger woman muttered, "A proper lady knows when to keep silent." Sam folded his arms. "And a proper gentleman knows when to stop talking nonsense," he said mildly. The woman flushed red. Mrs. Patterson pursed her lips. "You can't just stroll into my house demanding special treatment." "I'm not asking for special treatment," Margaret replied, voice steady now. "Only fairness. If that's too much, then I'll find somewhere else." The boarding house keeper's face turned the color of ripe beets. "Well, I never." "No," Margaret said quietly, "I suppose you haven't. You've never had to choose between your dignity and a roof over your head. You've never buried your family and crossed half the country chasing a shred of hope. So yes, I speak my mind. And if that makes me troublesome, so be it." Gasps rippled across the porch. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Sam broke the silence. "Come on, Miss Sullivan," he said evenly. We'll find other arrangements." Mrs. Patterson sputtered. "Mr. McKenna." "You should be ashamed." "Proud of it," Sam said, lifting Margaret's trunk again. "Afternoon, ladies." As they walked away, laughter and whispers exploded behind them. But Margaret kept her head high. Her legs shook, but she refused to let it show. After a block, she whispered, "I'm sorry. You were only trying to help, and I ruined it." "Ruined it." Sam chuckled. "You gave Willow Creek more entertainment than it's had in months." "Did you see Patterson's face? Looked like she swallowed a live toad." Margaret couldn't help a small laugh. "It's not funny. Now everyone will believe what Theodore said." "They already did," Sam replied. "Difference is, now they know you've got spirit. Folks remember spirit longer than gossip." They reached his wagon at the livery stable. Sam loaded her trunk in the back and helped her up to the bench seat. She was grateful for the shade beneath the canopy. As the horses started forward, Margaret noticed people turning to stare. Some whispered. Others nodded respectfully to Sam, but ignored her entirely. Near the general store stood Theodore Blackwood himself, holding court among a group of men. His smirk vanished when he saw them together. "McKenna," he shouted, "you're making a fool of yourself, talking on my leavings." Sam pulled the reins, stopping the team. His voice carried easily. "Only fool I see is a man who mistakes strength for stubbornness." "She's trouble," Blackwood snapped. "Mark my words, you'll regret it." "The only thing I regret," Sam said calmly, "is wasting breath on a man who don't know a good woman when he sees one." Theodore's face turned scarlet. "She's no lady, just a mouthy spinster who doesn't know her place." Before Sam could answer, Margaret touched his arm. "Let's go," she said softly. "He's not worth it." For a moment he looked ready to argue, then nodded. He clicked the reins, and the horses moved on. Behind them, Theodore's curses faded into the wind. At the edge of town, the air smelled cleaner, free of dust and judgment. The open prairie stretched before them, endless and golden. Margaret let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you said back there." "Weren't nothing but the truth," Sam replied. "Besides, seemed to me you could defend yourself just fine." That drew a small, genuine smile from her. "My mother would be horrified. She always said a lady never raises her voice in public." Sam's eyes softened. "And what else did your mother say?" "She said dignity costs nothing and is worth everything. That kindness and strength belong together. And that an educated woman should never apologize for thinking." "Sounds like a wise woman," he said. "She was," Margaret murmured, touching the cameo at her throat. "Influenza took her and my father 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Sam said quietly. Then they rode in silence, the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels filling the space between them. The land rolled out in waves of tall grass and scattered mesquite trees. Harsh and honest, Margaret thought, not like the town with its small-minded cruelty. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Why did you really offer to help me?" He was quiet long enough that she wondered if he'd answer. When he did, his voice was low. "My wife and son died 3 years back. Fever. After that, I threw myself into the ranch. Figured if I kept busy, I wouldn't have to think. Near worked myself to death instead. My foreman's wife finally told me I needed help, or I'd be joining them soon." Margaret listened, surprised by his honesty. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Don't be. I've been trying to hire someone for months. Hard to find good help. Folks don't like working for a widower with a reputation for being difficult." He gave a wry half-smile. "When I saw you standing in the street, chin high, while the whole town stared, I thought maybe we could understand each other. 2 difficult folks making the best of things." Margaret's lips curved. "So we're both too stubborn for our own good." "Seems that way," Sam said, his smile faint but real. The sun dipped lower, painting the prairie in amber light. Ahead, a cluster of buildings appeared, the McKenna Ranch. Her chest tightened with a strange mix of fear and hope. "What if they're right?" she asked softly. "What if I am too difficult?" "Then you'll be difficult," Sam said simply. "Ranch'll still need running. Cattle still need tending. Life goes on." She laughed quietly. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," he said. "It's people who make it hard." As the wagon creaked toward the horizon, the McKenna Ranch came into view, sprawling pastures of golden grass stretching beneath the fading sun. Margaret could see fences, corrals, and a sturdy timber and stone house standing proudly at the center. For the first time since she'd stepped off the coach, she felt something that resembled hope. "It's larger than I imagined," she said softly. Sam smiled faintly. "It's home. Or it will be, for as long as you choose to stay." The word choice caught her attention. It had been a long time since anyone had offered her a real choice. Everything in her life lately had been about survival, taking whatever came, whether she wanted it or not. When they rolled into the yard, several men stopped their work to stare. Margaret felt every gaze, but lifted her chin anyway. A woman with graying hair stepped out of the house, wiping her hands on an apron. Her eyes were wary but kind. "Maria," Sam called, setting the brake. "This is Miss Sullivan. She'll be helping out for a while." Maria gave a small curtsy. "Bienvenida, señorita. You must be tired from your travels." "I am," Margaret admitted, her throat tight with gratitude. "Thank you." Sam hopped down and offered his hand. She accepted, stepping onto the packed earth. As she straightened, her eyes caught her reflection in the water trough. Hair loosened from its pins, dress rumpled, skin dusty. She looked nothing like the woman who'd left St. Louis, full of cautious optimism. Yet there was something new in her face, steel in her jaw, defiance in her eyes. Blackwood had called her too stubborn. Mrs. Patterson had called her trouble. But standing here, with honest work before her, and a man who didn't flinch from her strength, Margaret decided she could live with those names. The sun slid low, painting the fields rose and gold. For tonight she would have a roof, a meal, and a sense of belonging she hadn't known in years. It wasn't the life she had planned, but maybe it was better. Sam leaned against the corral fence, pretending to study the horses, but really watching the small whirlwind of energy that was Margaret Sullivan. In 3 days she'd already reorganized his kitchen stores, catalog supplies, and now was locked in a battle of wills with Jake Porter, his most set in his ways ranch hand. "Miss, I'm telling you, that ain't how it's done," Jake grumbled, sweat shining on his neck. "We've drawn water like this for 20 years. "And wasted half of it in the process," Margaret replied briskly. "If you tilt the trough at this angle, the water will flow straight through instead of splashing out." Jake muttered under his breath, "Women don't know nothing about ranch work." Sam saw her spine stiffen, a warning sign he'd already learned. But instead of arguing, she simply smiled, marched to the trough, and adjusted the plank herself. It took effort, but she managed, and sure enough, the water ran neatly, with no waste. Jake stared, then spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Lucky guess," he said, and stomped off. Sam couldn't help but smile. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, though his voice held admiration. She reminded him of the wild mares that refused to be broken, and that was exactly what made them valuable. Will Hartley, his foreman, walked up beside him. "She's something, ain't she?" "She's holding her own," Sam admitted. "Jake's sore 'cause she was right about that trough. Been telling him for months he's losing water, but he never listens to me." Will grinned. Guess he needed a lady to show him. Sam said nothing, only watched Margaret cross the yard with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. Her once fine green dress now showed dust at the hem and damp patches beneath the arms. Her hair escaped in wisps, but she carried herself with steady determination. The men VE started a betting pool, Will said casually. Sam frowned. On what? How long before she gives up and heads back east? Jake says a week. Tom's betting too. Sam's jaw tightened. She's not going anywhere. Will raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Word spread that Morrison from the Double Bar asked after her yesterday. Said he might make her a proper offer. The idea twisted in Sam's stomach. She's not available, he said too sharply. Will chuckled. Thought you said this was a business arrangement. Before Sam could reply, a sharp cry split the air near the chicken coop. That is absolutely barbaric. Margaret's voice carried clear across the yard. Sam and Will hurried over to find her standing nose to nose with young Tom Briggs, who held a squawking chicken upside down by its feet. It's just a chicken, ma'am, Tom protested. We eat 'em all the time. Not that one, Margaret said firmly. That's Henrietta, the best layer in the flock. Tom blinked. How could you possibly know that? Because I've been keeping records. She pulled a small notebook from her apron. 5 eggs in 3 days. The others average only 3. It would be foolish to eat our most productive bird. Tom looked helplessly at Sam. Boss. Sam fought a grin. She's got a point. Let Henrietta be. Tom sighed and released the bird, who strutted off indignantly. Margaret looked triumphant until Tom reached for another. Not that one either, she said quickly. That's Prudence, she's broody. Might hatch chick soon. Sam cleared his throat. Miss Sullivan, we do need supper. Of course, she said, flipping through her notes. Take the brown hen by the fence. She hasn't laid in 4 days and looks past her prime. Tom shot Sam a bewildered glance. Sam just nodded. You heard the lady. As Tom disappeared with the chosen chicken, Sam turned to her. You've been keeping records on the hens? Early mornings, she said, tucking the notebook away. I wake before everyone else. It seemed wise to observe productivity. Of course you did, Sam murmured, amused. Walk with me. I want to show you something. They headed toward the eastern pasture, the afternoon sun casting long shadows. A soft breeze carried the scent of sage. The men are struggling with the changes, he said finally. I've noticed, she answered dryly. Jake especially. He treats my existence like a personal insult. He's set in his ways, Sam said. They all are. This ranch has run the same way for years. And you, she asked, are you set in yours? He thought for a moment. Used to be. Then my wife died. Taught me life changes whether you want it to or not. After that, seemed foolish to fight every new idea. They reached the top of a small rise where the land opened before them, a valley of rolling grass, a creek glinting in the distance, and cattle scattered like dark shadows across gold. It's beautiful, Margaret said softly. Wild but beautiful. This is what you'll be working for, Sam told her. Not for me, not for anyone's approval, for this land. It don't care if you're a man or woman. It just asks that you show up and do the work. She turned to face him fully. Do you think I can do it? Or are you betting, with the others on when I'll quit? The question caught him off guard. He studied her tired eyes, the dust on her skirt, the stubborn lift of her chin. I think, he said slowly, you've done more in 3 days than my last housekeeper did in a month. And I think anyone betting against you is a fool. Something softened in her face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. Tomorrow's cattle branding, hot, dirty work. The men'll be cranky. Jake already says women got no place near a branding fire. Then Jake'll have to adjust, she replied with a spark in her eyes. If I'm to help run this ranch, I need to see how it all works. And someone should be ready with bandages when those men burn themselves. Sam burst out laughing, a rare, deep sound that made her smile in return. You're gonna catalog my cattle too, ain't ya? Of course, she teased. How else will you know which bloodlines give the best calves? Or which cows are the best mothers? Honestly, your record-keeping is dreadful. Then I'll buy you notebooks, he said, still grinning. You can name the cattle while you're at it. I would never, she exclaimed, then added thoughtfully, although that spotted heifer near the creek does look like a Bessie. He laughed again, shaking his head. You're something else, Miss Sullivan. By the time they reached the ranch yard again, the sun was touching the horizon, painting everything in amber light. From the main house drifted the smell of supper. As they walked past the barn, the rhythmic sound of hooves drew their attention. Someone approaching fast. A rider on a flashy palomino trotted into view, dressed too fine for ranch work. Sam's mouth tightened. Chester Morrison, he muttered. The newcomer dismounted with an exaggerated flourish and doffed his hat to Margaret. Miss Sullivan, your beauty exceeds even the stories I've heard. She stiffened. Mr. Morrison, I presume? At your service, he said with a practiced smile. I rode all this way just to make your acquaintance. Sam crossed his arms. What do you want, Chester? Morrison's smile widened. Why, to offer the lady a better arrangement, of course. Chester Morrison leaned one elbow on his polished saddle, smiling like a man used to getting his way. I heard about what happened with Blackwood, he said, voice dripping with sympathy. Terrible business. A woman of refinement shouldn't be treated so poorly. I thought perhaps you'd prefer a gentler arrangement. Margaret felt Sam stiffen beside her. Arrangement? She asked coolly. Chester's grin widened. Why, marriage, of course. I could offer you comfort, a fine house, and staff to see to your every need. None of this rough living among dust and cattle. You'd have proper company again. I see, Margaret said. And what would I owe you in return for such comfort? Why, companionship, Chester replied smoothly. And the honor of keeping my name. You'd never have to lift another bucket or scrub another floor. Sam's jaw flexed. You'd make her a pet in a cage, Morrison. Chester laughed. Better a cage lined with velvet than a shack filled with manure. Miss Sullivan deserves better than hard labor. Margaret folded her arms. And you know what I deserve, Mr. Morrison? He tipped his hat. Only the best, ma'am. I'll have my buggy sent for you tomorrow. You can pack whatever you wish. For a heartbeat, the ranch yard seemed to freeze. Even the chickens stopped clucking. Margaret's voice, when it came, was soft but cutting. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your concern, but if I ever decide to marry, it will be for respect, not convenience. And certainly not for a velvet cage. Color rose in Chester's cheeks. You'd turn down an honest proposal? For what? Shoveling mud and eating beans with hired hands. I'd rather scrub floors than live under the thumb of a man who thinks a wife is a decoration, she said. The men near the barn pretended to be busy themselves, but their smirks gave them away. Chester's pride flared hotter. You'll regret this insolence. I could have made your life easy. Easy, she repeated. Perhaps. But not mine. Chester swung into the saddle, glaring at Sam. Enjoy your charity project, McKenna. Don't come begging when she ruins your ranch like she ruined Blackwood's pride. He wheeled his horse and thundered away. Dust hung in the air long after he'd vanished. Margaret let out a shaky breath. Well, she said finally, that was unpleasant. Sam stared after the rider, then turned to her. You handled him just fine. Her lips curved faintly. I seemed to be getting practice. The house was quiet except for the creak of old wood and the murmur of wind through the eaves. Margaret sat by the small oil lamp in her room, writing carefully in a worn notebook. Her hand ached, but the words steadied her. Work brings dignity. Dignity builds peace. There was a knock at the door. Come in, she called. Sam stepped inside, holding 2 steaming mugs. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. She smiled faintly. The wind keeps finding cracks in these walls. Always does. He handed her a mug. Coffee. She sipped and grimaced. "It's terrible." "I know," he said with a grin. "You make it better." Silence fell, comfortable this time. The lamplight softened the hard lines of his face. "About Morrison," he began, "you didn't have to be that sharp with him. He's powerful in town." "I've learned," she said quietly, "that powerful men often depend on others staying quiet. I can't do that anymore." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not afraid?" "Constantly," she admitted. "But I refuse to let fear make my choices." Sam nodded slowly. "That's brave." "Bravery's just fear that's been given a job," she said, and smiled. He laughed softly. "You always talk like that." "Only when I mean it." The next morning it dawned bright and sharp. The smell of smoke and hot iron filled the air as the men gathered at the corral for branding. Cattle lowed nervously, and dust rose in choking clouds. Margaret stood a little apart, notebook in hand, sleeves rolled, face streaked with heat. Jake eyed her skeptically. "You sure you want to be here, miss? Ain't no place for ladies." "I'm not a lady," she said briskly. "I'm a worker." That drew a few chuckles, but she ignored them. Instead, she moved between the pens, jotting down notes about each animal, age, weight, temperament. Sam noticed. "You plannin' to write a whole book?" "Only system," she replied. "So next year we can track which herds yield the strongest calves. Efficiency saves time and profit." Jake rolled his eyes, but Sam hid a smile. The woman had more sense than most men he'd hired. Hours passed. Margaret fetched water, bound small burns, even steadied a frightened calf while the iron hissed against its flank. By noon her dress was smeared with dirt and sweat, but her eyes still burned bright. When it was over, Sam found her sitting on the fence, hair falling loose, scribbling more notes. "You're something else," he said. She looked up. "If I'm in the way, in the way." He shook his head. "You just made this outfit run smoother than it has in months." That small, genuine smile returned. "Then I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," he said quietly. That evening, Maria handed Margaret an envelope. "Came with the supply wagon," she said. "From St. Louis." Margaret's stomach tightened. She took the letter to her room and broke the seal. The handwriting was familiar. Mr. Hartley, her former employer. "Miss Sullivan, I regret how things ended between us. I've since learned the board approved rest breaks, as you suggested. You were right. If you ever wish to return, I'll see to your reinstatement." Her hands trembled as she read the final line. "Some people were born for the city. The frontier will only wear you down." She set the letter aside, staring at the flickering lamp. He was wrong, she realized. The frontier wasn't wearing her down. It was shaping her into someone new, someone stronger. When she stepped outside, the moon hung silver over the pasture. Sam was by the fence, staring toward the horizon. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Guess not. Too much thinking." "I got a letter," she said. "An offer to go back east." He looked at her for a long moment. "And will you?" She shook her head. "No, I'm not done here yet." Relief flickered in his eyes before he masked it. "Glad to hear it." She leaned on the fence beside him. "You were right, you know. The land doesn't care who you are, it just wants you to show up." He nodded. "You've shown up every day since you got here." "And I'll keep doing it," she said softly. "For myself." They stood in silence. The night wrapped around them like a promise neither dared to name. Over the next weeks, word spread through Willow Creek that Margaret Sullivan had tamed McKenna's ranch. She convinced Sam to rotate grazing fields, built an herb garden by the kitchen, and even taught Maria to read between chores. The men grumbled at first, but her logic and her quiet persistence won them over. One morning, Jake arrived late to breakfast and tipped his hat sheepishly. "Made the trough adjustment like you said," he muttered. "Water loss is half what it was." Margaret blinked, then smiled. "Thank you, Jake." "Don't thank me, miss," he said. "Just figured you might be onto something that." Even Sam noticed the shift. The ranch ran smoother, quieter. He found himself watching her from a porch sometimes, not just for her work, but for the peace she brought. Yet every time he tried to speak of it, the words stuck in his throat. Then one afternoon, a telegram arrived, addressed to Samuel McKenna. He read it once, twice, face darkening. "What is it?" Margaret asked. He folded the paper slowly. "Trouble," he said. "Blackwood's filed a complaint. Says I stole property, meaning you." Her eyes widened. "What?" "He told the sheriff you broke a marriage contract," Sam said grimly. "He aims to have you arrested." The sound of hooves thundered up the dirt road before dawn, startling the chickens and scattering the dogs. Sam was already on the porch when Sheriff Ellis dismounted, dust clinging to his coat and mustache. "Mornin', McKenna," the sheriff said grimly. "Got business with you." Sam's jaw tightened. "Let me guess, Blackwood sent you." The sheriff nodded. "Claims this woman, Miss Sullivan, broke a signed contract of intent. Says you lured her away." Margaret stepped out beside Sam, pale but composed. "That's a lie." Ellis took off his hat. "I figured as much. But the law don't care much about figuring. It cares about paper. Blackwood's got himself a letter with your name and his on it, signed at the bottom." Margaret's heart sank. "The letter I sent agreeing to travel here," she murmured. "It wasn't a contract, it was correspondence." "Doesn't matter how you meant it," the sheriff said kindly. "If he pushes this, you could be fined or worse." Sam crossed his arms. "You gonna haul her in over a snake like Blackwood?" Ellis sighed. "No, but I'll need you both in town to make a statement. Best do it before he stirs up more trouble." Margaret lifted her chin. "Then we'll go now." When they arrived in Willow Creek, word had already spread. People gathered along the boardwalk, whispering behind their hands as the sheriff led them toward his small office. Blackwood waited outside, hat tilted, smirking already in place. "Well, well," he drawled. "Didn't take long for your fancy morals to catch up with you, Miss Sullivan." Margaret met his gaze evenly. "You can call me Miss Sullivan all you like, Mr. Blackwood, but you'll never call me wife." A ripple of laughter ran through the watching crowd. Blackwood's face darkened. "You think this is funny," he snapped. "I paid for your travel. You owe me." "Owe you?" Margaret repeated, her voice calm but sharp as glass. "You paid for a seat on a stagecoach, not the ownership of a human being." Murmurs rose from the onlookers, some approving, some scandalized. "Careful, miss," Blackwood sneered. "You forget where you are. Women don't talk like that here." "Then maybe it's time they did," she said. The sheriff stepped between them. "Enough. Let's settle this proper. Blackwood, you filed a complaint. You got proof of wrongdoing." Blackwood pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket, signed by her hand. Ellis unfolded it, scanned the contents, then read aloud, "I accept your offer to come to Willow Creek and begin a life together." He looked up. "Ain't no marriage vow here. Just intent. You can't force a woman to keep a promise she never sealed." Blackwood's voice rose. "That's theft, Sheriff. I invested in her travel." Sam stepped forward. "How much?" Blackwood blinked. "What?" Sam reached into his coat, pulled out a small pouch, and dropped it into the dust between them. "Stage fare from St. Louis to Willow Creek. Every cent with interest." The coins clinked sharply. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Debt settled," Sam said evenly. "Now get off my land and out of her life." Blackwood's jaw clenched. "You'll regret crossing me, McKenna. And you," he turned on Margaret, "you'll come crawling back when you've had your fill of dirt and sweat." She looked him straight in the eye. "The only thing I'll crawl away from is your memory." The crowd erupted in whispers and low laughter. Even the sheriff looked amused. "Reckon that settles it," Ellis said. No crime here, Blackwood. You can take your pride home and nurse it. Blackwood glared at them both, then spat in the dust. You'll see what happens when you make a fool of me. He spun on his heel and stalked off. The sheriff tipped his hat to Margaret. For what it's worth, miss, I'm glad you stood your ground. Folks around here could use more of that. Thank you, Sheriff, she said quietly. As they made their way back to the wagon, Sam noticed the way the townsfolk looked at her now, not with scorn, but curiosity, even respect. Seems you've changed a few minds, he said. She gave a small, tired smile. Or made a few enemies. Same thing in this town, he said dryly. That night, the sky burned orange before fading to purple. Margaret stood by the fence, arms resting on the top rail, watching the cattle move like slow shadows in the distance. The air smelled of sage and smoke and something new, freedom. Sam joined her quietly. You handled yourself fine today. I only spoke the truth, she said. Though I wish I hadn't had to. He nodded. Blackwood won't forget it. Neither will I, she said softly. But I won't let him decide who I am. Sam leaned on the rail beside her. You've got grit, Margaret. She smiled faintly. You sound surprised. Not surprised, he said. Just proud. Their eyes met briefly in the dim light, something unspoken passing between them. Something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Tomorrow we start the irrigation ditches, he said finally, breaking the moment. Then I'll be ready, she replied, and turned back toward the house. The following week brought the first rain of the season, brief, heavy, and wild. Margaret stood in the doorway as thunder rolled over the hills, watching sheets of water pour from the sky. Sam and the men raced to secure the fences, but the ground turned to mud within minutes. Stay inside, he shouted as he rode past. But when the corral gate broke under the weight of rushing water, Margaret didn't think twice. She grabbed a rope and ran. Miss Sullivan. Maria cried after her. But Margaret was already outside, skirt soaked, boots sinking in the muck. A calf had slipped into the current near the ditch, bawling in terror. Without hesitation, she waded in, catching the rope around her arm. Hold on, she shouted, fighting the pull of the water. Sam saw her from across the field. Margaret, he roared, charging toward her. By the time he reached her side, she had the rope looped around the calf's neck. Together they dragged the frightened creature back to safety, collapsing in the mud. When the storm passed, they sat breathless, soaked to the skin, laughing in disbelief. You're insane, Sam said between gasps. Possibly, she said, pushing her wet hair from her face. But the calf's alive. He looked at her, mud-streaked, fearless, radiant in the aftermath of chaos, and realized that she wasn't just helping his ranch. She was saving him. That evening, after the men had gone to bed, Sam found her on the porch wrapped in a blanket, hair still damp. Mind if I sit? He asked. Only if you don't scold me, she said. He chuckled and sat beside her. You're impossible to scold. I've been told, she replied, smiling. For a while, they listened to the crickets and the soft drip of water from the eaves. The world felt washed clean, reborn. I used to think I came here to survive, she said quietly. Now I think I came here to live. Sam looked out over the darkened fields. I think the land knew that before you did. She turned to him then, eyes shining in the lamplight. And you? He hesitated, then said softly, maybe I came here to find someone who'd remind me what living looks like. Her heart thudded. For once, she didn't look away. Then maybe we both found what we were looking for. The peace didn't last. 3 nights after the storm, the ranch dogs began barking. Low, warning growls that rolled through the dark like thunder. Sam was out of bed instantly, rifle in hand. Margaret met him in the hall, tying her shawl over her nightdress. What is it? She whispered. He moved to the window, peering through the glass. Light, he said tightly. Out by the barn. She saw it too, a flicker of orange against the black sky. Fire, she breathed. Sam didn't wait. He threw open the door and ran into the night, shouting for the men. Margaret followed despite his warning cry for her to stay back. By the time they reached the barn, the flames were climbing fast, hungry and wild. The air roared with heat, and the horses screamed inside. "Get water," Sam bellowed. "Jake, the well move." Margaret didn't hesitate. She grabbed a blanket, soaked it in the trough, and pulled it over her head. Smoke burned her lungs, but she pushed through the door where two terrified Maras were trapped behind fallen beams. "Margaret, no." Sam shouted after her, but she was already inside. The heat was unbearable. Her dress singed at the hem, but she pressed on, untying the ropes with trembling fingers. One horse bolted past her, nearly knocking her off her feet. The other refused to move, frozen by fear. She slapped its flank, shouting hoarsely, "Go! Run!" When it finally bolted, she turned, just as the roof groaned and a burning beam gave way above her. Strong arms wrapped around her, dragging her clear just as it collapsed. Sam's voice was in her ear. "I told you to stay back." She coughed hard, barely able to speak. "You needed help." He half laughed, half growled. "You'll be the death of me, woman." They stumbled into the yard as the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks. The men formed a chain from the well, dousing nearby sheds to stop the fire from spreading. By dawn, the flames were out, but half the barn was gone, and 3 horses were dead. Sam stood in the smoking ruin, fists clenched. This wasn't lightning. Margaret followed his gaze to the footprints leading away from the back wall, boot prints. "Blackwood," she said quietly. Sam nodded grimly. He finally showed his hand. Sheriff Ellis arrived by noon, eyes narrowing at the charred wreckage. "You sure it was him?" Sam pointed to the tracks. "Rode in from the west. Same shoes he wore in town." Ellis sighed. "I'll need witnesses." "He's done hiding," Sam said. "He'll come back to finish what he started." "Then I'll wait for him," Ellis said, checking his revolver. Margaret, standing nearby, spoke up. "No. He'll expect Sam or the sheriff. He won't expect me." Ellis frowned. "What are you suggesting, miss?" She met his eyes steadily. "Let me draw him out." Sam turned sharply. "Absolutely not." "He wants to humiliate me," she said, "to prove I can be scared into silence again. If I face him, he'll make a mistake." Sam's voice rose. "No, you're not bait." "I'm a woman who's been running from men like him my whole life," she said softly. "Not anymore." They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Sam cursed under his breath. "You're going to get me gray before my time." Margaret smiled faintly. "You're already halfway there." That night, the ranch lay quiet under a pale half-moon. The sheriff hid near the gate with Jake and Will, while Sam stayed close to the house. Margaret stood alone by the porch, her shawl around her shoulders, a lamp burning beside her like a signal. Hours passed. The wind whispered through the grass. Then hoofbeats. Blackwood emerged from the shadows, face hard and eyes glittering. "Well, if it ain't the runaway bride," he sneered. "Didn't think I'd come back, did you?" "I hoped you wouldn't," she said evenly. "But then, cowards rarely know when to quit." His grin faltered. "Careful now. You've already cost me my name. I lost contracts, respect, men laugh when I pass. You think I'll let that stand?" "You burned my barn," she said quietly. "You could have killed people." "You should have taken my offer," he snapped. "Could have lived easy. Now you'll learn what happens when a woman forgets her place." He raised his pistol and froze as the sheriff stepped out behind him, revolver drawn. "That's enough, Blackwood." Blackwood turned slowly, sneering. "So she hides behind the law now?" "No," Margaret said. "I stand beside it." He hesitated just long enough for Sam to appear from the shadows. "Drop it," Sam ordered. "You're done." Blackwood's hand twitched. "You wouldn't shoot me." Sam's voice was ice. "Try me." For a long moment, the night held its breath. Then Blackwood's nerve broke. He dropped the gun. Ellis stepped forward, cuffing him swiftly. "You're under arrest for arson and attempted murder." Blackwood spat at the ground. "You think this changes anything? You'll never belong here, Sullivan. You'll always be an outsider." Margaret looked at him calmly. "Maybe. But I'd rather be an outsider with integrity than a coward who hides behind power." He glared at her one last time as the sheriff led him away. The hooves faded into the distance, and silence returned. When dawn came, the ranch smelled of wet ash and new hope. The men were already at work clearing the wreckage. Margaret joined them, sleeves rolled, hair tied back. Sam tried to protest, but she waved him off. "Work heals faster than rest," she said. He watched her for a long time before finally nodding. "You're remarkable." She smiled faintly. "I'm persistent." Later, as the sun climbed higher, the sheriff rode back. "Blackwood's gone," he said simply. "Judge'll see him next week. With your testimony, he won't be back." Margaret exhaled deeply. "Thank you, Sheriff." He tipped his hat. "You did most of it yourself, miss. Folks in town are talking about your courage. Some even said you shamed half the men in Willow Creek into remembering what decency looks like." She blinked, surprised. "I wasn't trying to prove anything." "Sometimes just standing your ground proves more than any speech," he said, mounting up. "Take care, Miss Sullivan." As he rode away, Sam leaned on the porch rail. "You heard the man. You've got a reputation now." She laughed softly. "I'm sure the town matrons are horrified." "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not." Weeks passed. The barn was rebuilt stronger than before, the men taking pride in every beam and nail. Margaret worked alongside them, organizing supplies, sketching plans, even helping repair tack. The ranch seemed alive in a new way, more purposeful, more united. One evening, as the sky blazed pink and gold, Sam joined her by the garden she'd planted near the porch. Tiny green shoots had begun to break through the soil. "Looks like it's taking," he said. "Everything grows with patience," she replied, "and a little faith." He smiled faintly. "You've given this place both." She looked up at him. "And you've given me something too." "What's that?" "A home," she said simply. He stepped closer. "You think you might keep it?" Her breath caught. "If you'll have me." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Margaret Sullivan, I'd have been a fool not to." She smiled, a soft, honest smile that carried all the fire and grace of the woman she'd become. Then it settled. He kissed her then, slow, gentle, certain. The wind stirred around them, carrying the scent of wildflowers and rain and something new blooming in the dust. The next spring, Willow Creek held its first harvest fair in years. Margaret stood beside Sam at a booth laden with baked bread, herbs, and woven baskets. Children ran past laughing. Jake and Will argued good-naturedly over who'd win the horse race. Mrs. Patterson passed by with her parasol and actually smiled. "Miss Sullivan, pardon me, Mrs. McKenna, you've done wonders with that ranch." Margaret returned the smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson." As the older woman walked away, Sam leaned close. "You've even tamed her." Margaret laughed. "Not tamed. Just showed her stubbornness can be useful." He slipped an arm around her waist. "Guess that makes us both stubborn then." She tilted her head toward him. "Seems it worked out." They looked out over the fair, the golden fields beyond, the town that once doubted them. The land stretched endless and alive, just as it had the day she arrived. But now it finally felt like home. Soft instrumental fades in gentle guitar and wind. They say the West was built by men with iron wills and calloused hands. But that's not the whole story. Because sometimes what builds a place, what saves it isn't strength alone. It's the quiet courage of someone who refuses to be broken. Someone who shows up day after day with a steady heart and a spine of steel. Margaret Sullivan came to Willow Creek with nothing but a suitcase, a brooch, and a handful of hope. She was laughed at, turned away, and nearly burned out by the same fire that tried to destroy her. But she stayed. She stayed when they told her she didn't belong. She stayed when the world tried to remind her of her place. And somewhere between the dust and the dawn, she found her own. They called her stubborn once, and maybe she was. But out here, stubbornness was another word for survival. And in time, even the town that once whispered her name learned to say it with respect. The McKenna ranch grew. The land flourished. And the people changed, because one woman showed them that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands its ground and says, "No, I will not yield." Margaret never wanted to be a hero. She only wanted to live honestly, to work with her hands, to speak her mind, to love without fear. But in doing that, she became something more. She became proof that dignity isn't granted, it's earned. And Sam McKenna? He found what he'd lost, not just a partner for his land, but peace for his heart. Together they built something real, something worth keeping. Not out of comfort, but out of courage. So if you ever find yourself in Willow Creek, they'll still tell her story. About the woman who came on a dusty stagecoach and changed everything. They'll point to the ranch that still stands strong and say, that's where Margaret Sullivan made her home. And maybe, if the wind's right and the grass is tall, you'll hear her laughter echo across the fields, a reminder that even in the harshest places, grace can take root. Music swells, soft, hopeful. Because sometimes, the wildest frontier isn't the land we conquer. It's the life we dare to build when the world says we can't.